When we talk about the American Civil War, most people think of one word, slavery. But what if we told you that the true causes of the Civil War run deeper into the economic roots of the South, the political chaos of the Union, and a fight over the very soul of the Constitution? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the real causes of the American Civil War. Some well-known, some conveniently ignored. This isn't just a history lesson. It's the story of a nation tearing itself apart, a tale of greed, ideology, rebellion, and power. Buckle up. Let's start with the obvious, slavery. It was not just a Southern institution, it was the institution. By the 1850s, nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans lived in the South. Slavery powered the Southern economy through cotton, tobacco, and sugar. The invention of the cotton gin in 1793 made slavery even more profitable, expanding its reach westward. But this wasn't just about labor. It was about identity, power, and way of life. Southern elites viewed slavery as essential not only for economic prosperity, but also for maintaining their social hierarchy. Slavery meant wealth, it meant status, and it meant control. The South's entire social and economic framework was built on slavery. Wealthy planters, often owning hundreds of slaves, dominated Southern politics and culture. Poor white Southerners, though they owned no slaves themselves, were still invested in the system because they aspired to that wealth, or at minimum, felt superior to enslaved people. Slavery wasn't just tolerated, it was entrenched. As northern states began to abolish slavery, a divide emerged. To the north, slavery was becoming morally and economically outdated. The North, driven by industrial capitalism, moved toward wage labor and factory systems, which clashed with the Southern plantation economy. To the South, Northern criticism wasn't just political, it was personal. It was seen as a direct attack on their sovereignty and survival. Now you've probably heard the phrase states' rights. It's one of the most commonly cited causes of the Civil War. But let's unpack that. What rights were these states really fighting for? The right to manage their own laws? Sure. But specifically, they wanted to maintain the right to own slaves. Southern states argued that the federal government had no authority to interfere with their so-called domestic institutions, a thinly veiled reference to slavery. When northern states refused to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, which required runaway slaves to be returned, the South saw this as a betrayal of constitutional duty. To them, states' rights meant the right to own human beings and force them into labor. So yes, it was about states' rights, but only the right to protect slavery. The North and South were growing apart, not just ideologically, but economically and culturally. The North was rapidly industrializing. Factories, railroads, banking, and trade flourished. Immigrants flooded in, supplying cheap labor and fueling growth. Cities expanded and education systems improved. Literacy rates climbed. The northern economy diversified. The South, still largely agrarian. Their economy revolved around plantations and cash crops. Slavery wasn't just useful, it was necessary. But this economic dependence came at a cost. Limited infrastructure, fewer schools, and little industrial growth. Southern leaders resisted modernization, fearing it would undermine slavery. These economic differences fed into political divisions. Tariffs passed by the federal government were designed to protect northern industries, but hurt southern planters. The South felt exploited, as if the North was rigging the system in its favor. In many southern minds, the Union no longer served their interests. Now add politics into the mix. The 1850s were a decade of chaos. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 tried to maintain a fragile balance between free and slave states. But every time the country expanded westward, the same question emerged. Would the new territories allow slavery? Then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. It allowed new states to decide for themselves. Popular sovereignty. What followed was Bleeding Kansas, a mini-civil war between pro- and anti-slavery settlers. The violence shocked the nation and foreshadowed the national conflict to come. Meanwhile, the newly formed Republican Party, founded in 1854, had one mission: stop the expansion of slavery. Its rise terrified Southern leaders. They saw it as a party of Northern aggression, determined to destroy their way of life. And then, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Though he wasn't an abolitionist in the modern sense, the South saw him as a direct threat. He opposed the spread of slavery into the Western territories, a stance that Southern leaders believed would ultimately lead to slavery's extinction. Before Lincoln could even take office, 7 Southern states seceded. They didn't just leave quietly, they issued declarations explaining why. And what did those declarations say? Over and over again, they cited slavery as the reason. Mississippi's declaration stated, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world." After the war, many in the South promoted the lost cause narrative, a way of reframing the conflict as a noble struggle for independence rather than a war to preserve slavery. This myth painted Confederate leaders as tragic heroes and denied that slavery had anything to do with the war. But the documents tell a different story. The lost cause became a tool for healing white Southern pride, but it twisted the historical record. Take the declarations of secession from Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas. Each of them explicitly mentions slavery as a cause. These weren't vague documents. They were detailed, precise, and unapologetic. They weren't just fighting for independence, they were fighting for slavery. While tensions had been building for decades, the spark came on April 12, 1861. Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War had begun. But remember, the gunfire at Fort Sumter wasn't random. It was the result of years of conflict over slavery, economic power, political control, and national identity. What's also important to understand is how the idea of compromise slowly crumbled in the years leading up to war. Time and again, American politicians attempted to create peace through legislation, but these were just temporary fixes. The Compromise of 1850, for example, allowed California to enter as a free state and included a stricter fugitive slave law. It pleased no one. The South was angry that more free states were joining the Union. The North, especially abolitionists, were outraged by the federal enforcement of returning runaway slaves. Let's not forget the Dred Scott decision of 1857. The Supreme Court ruled that African Americans, free or enslaved, could not be American citizens and that Congress had no right to ban slavery in U.S. territories. This ruling shattered any illusion that slavery could be legally contained. It emboldened the South and enraged the North. Even moderate Northerners began to feel that the South had too much power in national politics. Additionally, literature played a powerful role. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin was more than just a novel. It ignited emotions across the country. Northerners saw the brutality of slavery through the eyes of characters. Southerners saw it as an attack on their way of life. Abraham Lincoln himself is said to have greeted Stowe by saying, "So, you're the little lady who wrote the book that started this great war." The culture war wasn't just fought in politics. It was in pulpits, newspapers, books, and public debates. The American identity was being pulled in opposite directions. One side seeing liberty as freedom from government control, the other seeing liberty as the freedom to not be enslaved. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below. What do you think was the biggest cause of the Civil War? Was it ideology, economy, or something else?